Faded, the boys left their beds and they traveled to the kitchen to try a second time to tell the grandmother what they saw that night. They tried to get a handle on what they saw, but it was as if they couldn't explain it. Again, my grandmother brushed them off with a coffee and newspaper. More important than their story, she told them to climb the mesa to investigate, so the boys wrangled their friends who shared the experience with them that night prior. As they passed on their bikes, the friends stayed on the dirt road looking up at the mesa as my father and uncle climbed up to see any evidence of the hell-burning fire they witnessed together. The mesa wasn't much taller than an average one-story house, though, so the brothers took less than 2 minutes to climb to the top, where the nightmare took place when they go to the top. They were hysterical and also relieved. There was no indication a bonfire of that enormity, or even a fire at all, had taken place in the mesa they had already seen in the night earlier. They climbed down and told the message to the friends who had also been a part of the shocking scene. Their native friends looked at them in shock, but neither said a word to them. They immediately turned their bikes around and proceeded home, and it was never talked about again, despite my father and brother asking about it. My grandmother and everybody else in the community just refused to talk about it again. My father is a skeptic. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal, like aliens, ghosts, mermaids, I mean, you name it. But whenever I ask about the skinwalker, he always turns pale and white. He gets quiet, jumpy, and Curdy had to plead to get the full story out of him, in fact, and I could see goosebumps in every hair standing up in his arms when he shared this experience. My grandma took me to Navajo Mountain in 2019 to show me her history and see how Navajo natives still live on this reservation today. According to her, not much has changed since living there. In the 80s too, I hiked and explored what I could of their reservation as to not invade or violate any of the Navajo reservation and its beauty here. However, I did feel a change in mood when I visited. My existence felt, I don't know, heavy, as if I wasn't supposed to be there, or as if I was invading on territory that wasn't meant for me, not caused by any of the community there or anything, but just by my presence being on the land or something. I will never forget my experience visiting, and all that I learned about the reservation life I climbed the mesa with. A skinwalker, my dad and uncle had seen its ritual, and I felt pretty normal until I got to the top and stood in the middle. I know it sounds weird, but I felt a darkness creep into me as I stood there, and ever since then I've never been the same. So my cat likes to go outside every day in the morning. He follows us to the door, takes the elevator down with us, and then goes about his day outside until we bring him back home again in the evening. Now, my cat isn't the most punctual guy, so it's pretty common for him to stay much later in the neighborhood, sometimes well into the night for like several days even, or he gets bored and doesn't play for more than 2 hours and wants to get back inside. The problem is that we're not home, so he just has to wait. My family and I lived in an apartment on the first floor, so my cat's solution is to sit under one of the balconies and meow at the top of his lungs to get our attention. When my home, it works perfectly fine, but when we're not, it's a lot less effective. So our solution was to gently ask our neighbors that have the key to our apartment to bring him up, so he doesn't have to wait outside all day. Those that don't have the key sometimes let him inside the building, so he's not literally outside, for example, when it's raining. Now our apartment is a bit special though, because it's bigger than the others, so to get inside there are 2 ways. When you get into the main hall, one takes the stairs to the left and open the door that has 2 locks. The second uses the elevator with the special key that goes directly inside of our apartment, and the door only has 1 lock. The cat is actually used to the second option, and me too, because we're both lazy. But when the neighbors, they don't have the key, let him inside the building, he goes up the stairs and waits, and since I usually use the elevator from the parking 2 floors below, That means that I don't really see him waiting in the hall, and he meows outside the door to get me to open it up for him, or my dad or my mum. But all around, we have our habits with my parents and neighbors, and it works fairly well. So now that you know how everything goes with the little guy, now we get to the good part. But my parents like the outdoors very much, so I'm usually left alone in the weekends. Generally, it means just taking care of chores and inviting my friends over so that we can have the apartment to ourselves, which is pretty nice this time. I was alone. It was late 11 p.m. Mish and I was just chilling in the living room. Before hearing meowing over the sound of the TV, someone must have let my cat in the building, and he's waiting outside the door like usual. I took my keys and started opening the first lock. I don't know about other pet owners, but I know my cat meows by heart pretty much. It's kind of a rising meow that's very high-pitched and very cute, and that also has a specific sort of rhythm to it because I've been hearing it nearly every day for like 5 years, and because of this I stopped. You see, the noise isn't what it usually is. It's like too deep and just off a bit. But this isn't my cat outside my door, and he's the only cat around that knows that he has to wait by the door and scream to be let inside. By that point, I had stopped halfway through opening the door and waited to hear him again, and noticed scratching this time. But my cat never scratches the door. At that point, I'm a bit weirded out by the situation, but the meowing is getting super loud, and I didn't want the neighbors to be woken up, so I continued with my key. But suddenly, I heard another noise that really freaked me out. It was a cough fought, the record too. I'm not a very cautious person, and in my whole 21 years of living in this apartment, I must have looked in the peephole a total of maybe, I don't know, 5 times. But a small part of my brain told me to do it, and thank God that I did it that night. So the go of my keys, and put my eye against the door, and I saw it. A man standing there meowing at my front door. To say that I was terrified is really an understatement, but my heart pretty much stopped. I just stood there petrified for what felt like an hour. I don't really know how long it took for me to move again, but eventually my buddy just took over, I guess, and I did what you'd expect. I ran for my phone, stood in the corner of the living room, and called the police. By the time that they got there, there was nobody in the front door. I can't even remember when. The meowing stopped, to be honest, and they just took my testimony before telling me to be cautious and left. To this day, I still don't know what that meowing guy wanted. I'm not sure I want to know anyway, but I also don't know how he got inside the building in the first place, since you need a key to access it, and how he knows that I would open the door if he imitated my cat in front of it. Well, at least I'll be careful from now on, I suppose. And that's good, but oh. And my cat eventually came back, and since then, and he's sleeping in my bed as I'm sharing this, so there's that. I guess so. I dated someone who earned a cadaver dog, but basically they can find dead bodies. It was a new term to me when I met them too, but anyways, they explained that they worked with rescue teams. We live in wilderness country. The dog's job was to sniff our bodies for people who might have gotten lost and died buried under avalanches, etc. After 5 months of dating, to my now asked if I could house or dog sit, I was more than happy to, because it was a great dog. I would be dog sitting for 2 weeks while they visited family. I was warned that it has happened on hikes before, that the dog picks up the scent of a corpse, and gave me the steps to follow. If it does happen, in the first couple of days were pretty uneventful. But then one day the dog is dragging me down this trail, and I'm panicking, because I was like, oh no, I'm going to see a dead body, aren't I? But the dog stops at this very stern woman, just sort of sauntering along. He keeps looking back and forth between me and the woman. She gives me a quick, "Your dog isn't well trained," and keeps going. I practically had to drag this dog away to get it away from this woman, and it happens with this same woman a few more times, so I call the owner to bring it up. I described the woman, and my ex is so shocked and confused by this, not familiar with this woman at all. But fast forward to my last night of dog sitting, I was going to bed and I had this horrific nightmare of being held down in the bed by this woman. I hear a bark and I wake up. And the dog is standing next to me on the bed. It's also in its alert position staring at the bed. And after that I didn't get any sleep, and I also never got any answers. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old, and living in my first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a pretty sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I guess you could say I knew how to handle myself, and learned at a young age to keep my head down, and not to go looking for trouble me. Apartment building was behind a bar as well. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke, and when they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment pretty much all the time. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would not, and say hello if I pass by, never any issues. Well, at least until one evening. One evening I came home from work. I passed the bar like I always did, and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking as I passed. He stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare, and it made me uncomfortable for sure, but I didn't think too much of it anyway. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door, and it was odd, because you have to buzz people into the building here. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors, so I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued, and so I finally shouted out, "Who is it?" But there was no response. Shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." No. I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so that we can talk." I went over to the people, and sure enough, it was that tall dude from the bar, so I loudly said, "Get out of here or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away, and I heard the building door open and then close, and it was gone. Or so I thought, because a few minutes later I peeked out the window, and he was standing in the parking lots. He seemed to be talking to himself or something. At this point, obviously I'm freaking out. I called my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police and that in the meantime him and his brother would come and check things out. I call the police and tell them what's going on. They said that a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out of my window and see them approach the tall dude. The tall dude takes one look at them and he just bolts. Well, my landlord and his brother tried to chase him, but the tall dude got away about 5 minutes later. The police arrive. I give my version of the events and also a description of this guy. And the officer just sort of stares at me and then says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been sexually assaulting women." Thank God you didn't open the door. A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar, and the owner called the police when told it reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and they arrested him. Turns out he was that guy. I live in Florida, and this incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma. So a little while ago now, back in July, the ex and I had just finalized the divorce, and I moved into Agated neighborhood, where every house was rented out by the same rental company or landlord. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops. All 15 houses are bordered around a man-made lake with the backyards facing the lake. No one really has a fenced backyard too. When you walk out of your back door, you see the lake in front of you, and your neighbors' backyards on each side of you. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party or barbecue or having people over to watch sports or something like that. I was and am still depressed about my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person that I got to know was my next-door neighbor Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love for guns. Steve is the true hero in this nightmare. My daughter Alice is 4 years old and I got her every weekend. Now his bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoil that girl to death too. She truly is my everything, and I count down the days to the weekend every week just to be with her. But that's why I was, upset when Irma came and I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her the weekend before the storm. She was with her mum. Then obviously the weekend of the storm, she was also with her mum. Then on top of that, the weekend after, she had to be with her mum because my power was still out. No AC in Florida is miserable. Let me tell you, the humidity was so bad that week that I ended up sleeping in my daughter's room the whole week, because she has the only room with a window that faced the lake. I opened the window, exposing just a window screen so the window from the lake could cool the room as much as possible. While I slept, eventually the power comes back and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. And that was when the nightmare started. My daughter would complain about the singing lady and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought that maybe she was referring to one of my ex's friends, or one of the teachers at a school. But maybe there was a teacher at a school that sang to the kids that she didn't like. That Saturday night, though, Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming like I've never heard. I ran into her room and turned on the light and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong, and all she could do was point to an empty corner of her room and say, "Look, look." But there was nothing there. She was acting as if she saw a ghost after I calmed her down. She started to talk about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy, make her go away." Obviously she was having nightmares, right? I showed her that there was nothing in the closet and nothing under the bed and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room and quickly fell back to sleep too. And it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice comes running into my room screaming, "She's back, she's back." Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room too, so I let her sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast, and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since her mum and I were still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her if or when she started having any of these nightmares again, so I could respond quicker after I set them up. I showed Alice how they worked to give her assurance that I could hear her, and she was safe, and that night she slept soundly.